Hey y'all, I'm Emily, an almost lifelong quilter with a lot of stories to tell. I have loved quilts and talking about them for as long as I can remember, and I'm here to celebrate the tradition of quilting with you. I'm so glad you're joining me this week here at Patchwork Revival. Hey y'all, and welcome to this edition of the Patchwork Revival Podcast. Today, I'm sitting down with my friend Kate Bierle of Due North Handmade. Kate is a prolific quilter. She has a whole story to tell us about how she learned to quilt, where she caught her quilting bug, how she evolved into the pattern writer and designer that she is today. She's going to tell us all about her business, all about her history, her quilting story. We're also going to hear a really fun story on a historical block that she stumbled across and some of the things that she learned about it. So stick around for that. A few housekeeping things before we dive into the conversation. I wanted to remind you that the podcast is available on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. We also have a video interview that you can view on YouTube. So we are on YouTube. Be sure to listen on your platform of choice. I would love it if you would subscribe to the show, share it with your friends. Quilting is all about connection and sharing, and I really hope that you're enjoying the podcast enough to share it with your friends. I can't wait to introduce you guys to my friend Kate. So, I guess to get started, Kate, if you would give us a little overview, introduction of yourself. Um, what do you want us to know about you?
I'm Kate, Kate Bierle. No one can say the last name ever on the first try, but that's fine. It's it's Bierle. Um, and I'm the human behind Due North Handmade. I have quilted, well, I made my first quilt when I was in first grade, which is a little pillow. It's a little nine patch, and like four of the squares have one has a little cross stitch on it, one has a little like oil fabric pen drawing on it of things that I liked, which was apparently dolls and jump rope, and one has a little applique heart on it. But yeah, it's a pillow that's still around here somewhere. And a lot of that came from my maternal grandmother, who was a prolific quilter. In my early life, she was a craft dabbler and did a little bit of everything, paintings and cross stitch and little quilting and some other things. But as I got older, she really, really, really was huge into quilting, and I still have a lot of her unfinished projects that I eventually want to get to, and things of that nature. Um, but growing up and kind of seeing her skills and what she was learning, and she was always trying to tell me about, something that she was trying that was new, and half the time I had no idea what she was talking about. But she passed in 2014, and or was it 2013, back, 10 or so years ago.
Mhm.
Um, and that's kind of about the point that I started getting more into quilting in my hobby side of life. And as I started to pick up other skills, now more self-taught on my own, I found myself thinking, oh, that's what she was trying to tell me when I was a freshman in college and, had no idea. Particularly like foundation paper piecing. Like I have this very vivid memory that came back later when I was learning about foundation paper piecing, that this is what she was actually trying to tell me at her kitchen table that one time about sewing on lines through paper, and had no concept at the time. But anyway, so she was a big influence, even more so afterwards. Um, and then I really started becoming prolific myself when people started having babies around me. And here I thought that
Mhm.
I can make a baby gift for less than it will cost me to go buy a baby gift, because you're that naive when you get started that, oh, fabric's not that expensive, right?
Yeah,
Um,
of course.
so no, so that's kind of where it started. And then I never really followed patterns per se, and always kind of figured out what I wanted on my own. And so from there, got into the pattern design and some of the pattern writing and trying to get some of my various ideas swirling around out and more cohesive. So it's a long way of saying my grandma gave me the bug and I really honed it as I got into being an adult and having people around that appreciated getting gifts that were quilts. So,
Yeah. I love what you said about almost how you feel like your grandma is more of an influence now that it's just you. Because I feel that way about my grandmother. Um, she was the quilter, and she taught me, she was like, well, this is how you do this, and this is how you do that. And I was like, oh, I like this. And she was like, well, I'll help you cut a quilt and all these things. And even now, I'm like, when I sit down to start something or think about making a project, like she's the first person I think of. And I think that's actually partly where I got the idea of um, kind of celebrating the legacy of where our quilting stories and knowledge comes from, because who knows what we're doing. I mean, I'm not going to flatter myself and say I'm going to be like influential like my mama was for me, but I think it's so cool. And the other thing, I vividly remember her trying to explain to me, um, she had a book, Eleanor Burns had this book that had a paper pieced like wedding ring, like the arcs were paper
okay.
pieced, double wedding ring. And she was trying to explain to me how it worked. And I was like, I don't get that. I don't know what you're trying to say. But yeah, now I get it. So thanks, YouTube. But I'm like, that
Right.
is so funny that we both had that that experience.
Yeah.
Um, so you made your nine patch pillow with your grandmother, or did you just like think, I want to make this? Did she like guide you through it?
It was actually part of a project at school where she
Hmm.
and some other kids' grandmas came in and helped us make these little quilts that was part of a school project, which was kind of fun. But yeah, I was 7 years old in first grade when we did it.
Hmm.
So
Cool.
it was not self-initiated at all, but still
Yeah.
very interesting.
Yeah. It got you thinking.
Hmm.
And then years went by and then you kind of jumped back in.
Hmm.
Were
Yep.
you a
Yeah, I did
craft
nothing
dabbler?
like, yeah. Um, I'm a little bit of a hobby collector, dabbler,
Hmm.
but because I've done some cross stitch and some hand embroidery, um, painting also. So, but yeah, I really, really enjoy the usability of a finished quilt too. So that's where I just really feel at home.
Yeah, I get it. Do you usually make, what size quilt do you usually make? I'm curious.
My go-to is usually a throw because
Hmm.
I like them big enough that I can still cuddle with them, but not so big that I can baste it on my table, is what
Yeah.
it comes down to. And if it's much wider than my table, then I really don't want to, I don't want to
Deal
baste
with
it
it.
myself, but then I don't want to rack up all the long arming costs all the time. And so, yeah, that's a struggle. And that's why I always have a stack of quilts that are waiting for me to get the energy to baste them or send them out to a long armer or rent one at
Yeah.
my local quilt shop and do it. But that requires time too, and life gets in the way. So,
Yep. Always. I'm a throw size maker too, and I always think I should make this a little bit bigger, but I finish all my stuff on my domestic.
hmm.
'Cause I'm kind of cheap and I like it. I actually like doing that. But the basting is horrific. I have like my table is that I use for basting is like a 72-inch like kind of workbench thing. So
Hmm.
I can get a pretty big one on there, but like the other day, uh, I was basting one, like pin basting it on the floor, like crawling around. I was like, this is ridiculous. It's like,
I did that one time, and I was not very pregnant at the time, and I thought I am never doing this again.
yeah, I was secretly hoping it would like precipitate labor. It did not. Don't bother. No, don't bother trying it at home because it didn't work. But my grandma basted stuff and hand quilted it. I guess with hand quilting, she had a frame, so maybe she didn't have to baste it so aggressively. But I'm like, you were like 90 doing this. Like, was that safe? I don't know. So, anyway, I think like you, I started becoming kind of intentional about quilting when people around me were having babies. It's like the perfect baby shower gift that
Hmm.
costs $1 billion by the time you
Yep.
finish making it. But quilting is like my love language, so it just felt right, you know. But how many years ago was that? When did you kind of decide? Was it just like a random thing, like, oh, they should have a quilt? Or how'd you kind of jump back into everything?
So it was right after I had moved to Minnesota. So we moved here in 2013, so about 12 years ago. And it was when my best friend from college, who was also my maid of honor, was having her first baby. And so I really wanted to give her something that was meaningful. And so that's where I landed. And so she's a dog lover, and I'm a dog lover. And so I found a bunch of cute baby fabric from big box store that had dogs on it and made this disappearing nine patch thing, which I had no idea of what quilting, how to actually do that part. So I tied it, and yeah, it's still around. It's still like in one piece. So that's a bit of progress, I think. But yeah, it's really interesting to think about how I restarted to where I ended up. But yeah, so that was the first one that I really done independently. And then of course the next one I did was finishing a block of the month quilt that my grandmother had started, and she'd done 12 or 10 of the 12 blocks. And then I did the other two and was wholly out of my depth with these intricate patterns. Um, and there was fabric that was all set apart for the borders that were cut into these big giant squares, and I had no idea what she was planning to do with that. And so, like, I don't know, I just kind of made something up and had a friend long arm it because I was not able to handle that.
Yeah. But that's good that you like stuck with it because quilting is intimidating, I think, when you're just, especially when you're like by yourself. So you
Hmm.
didn't jump into like classes or anything. You were just like, I'm gonna do this.
No, I had never taken a quilting class until actually during COVID. And I did a virtual one that was specifically on free motion quilting because I wanted to figure more of that out. Yeah, but most of it was YouTube videos and just messing around on the little basic machine that I had and figuring it out.
Yeah. That's I think that's the best way to learn, honestly. And at least it's fabric you're like experimenting with, not
Hmm.
like I don't know. Did you ever do any events or like meetings? Did you ever get involved in like a local guild or club or anything like that? Or are you always kind of were you like a lone wolf quilter?
I recently, like in the last maybe 4 years, have been part of my local guild a little bit, and then there's a Minneapolis chapter of the Modern Quilt Guild that does meetings virtually, which is awesome because I'm an hour and a half away. So I can
Hmm.
still occasionally go to some in-person things, but I can still catch all the meetings without like doing whatever. And that just has been a really good fit. Um, the local one is a different style that doesn't appreciate the style that I have, let's just say. So that wasn't the best fit for me. Um, but yeah, I really, really, really enjoy my local-ish Modern Quilt Guild group and have made some good friends there too.
Nice. Do they do shows or like social events or
hmm
things like that?
Yep. So there's usually a meetup once a month at one of the public libraries up in the Twin Cities. And so I'll go up to those occasionally and usually group it with a trip to my favorite quilt shop up there too. Um, and then there's a couple of times a month they'll do virtual sew-ins where one's late at night, one's early in the morning, and things like that. So yeah, I'll do those when I can, when they work with the family schedule.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the funny thing. I started getting involved in my local. We don't, well, we have some, I think there's a guild here, but I was like, guild sounds very official. I just don't think I should be doing that. And a lot of times the meetings are not at great times for like working moms or moms in
hmm
general, especially if you have younger kids. And so I finally found a club. Like we call ourselves a quilt club, but there's enough people there. Even in, I mean, I live in a pretty small town in West Texas, and there's enough people there that there's enough different stylistically. Everybody kind of just appreciates everyone, so that's at least nice. But it changed things for me because it made me feel like there was just more local resources, stuff for me to get plugged into. Like you kind of hear about things by word of mouth a little bit more when you're like face to face kind of with people.
hmm
And I always just want to pass that on to people who are listening to the podcast. Like go out, find a local community as best you can. Um, and if one thing is not a great fit for you, there's probably something else. And I really
Right.
love hearing, yeah, I really love hearing the virtual thing because I have a hard time. This year, I've hardly made any of my meetings because every Monday night that the meetings have happened, I've been like late at work or something, just like I just can't make it. So, anyway, I miss my little quilt club, but hopefully I can jump back into it a little bit this year.
Yeah, it's so true too. When you're face to face, you just learn things better. Well,
You
me, I
do.
learn things better from seeing what other people are doing and really getting up close and personal with some of their work and being able to talk to them about it too. So, yeah.
I know. And seeing people's work in person like blows me away because I fall into the quilter trap that's like, am I an artist? I don't really know. I don't really care. But then when you like see what other people are doing, you're like, this is like incredible. And it just fills you with some kind of like appreciation and inspiration that I just don't really get anywhere else because quilts are my thing, apparently.
hmm
So I love
It's a
seeing,
creative skill, though. It's definitely a skill set that you have to work on, but you can also work on it and still not be good at it. So I feel
yeah,
like there's definitely a creative artist element to it, but like anything else, you can also work on it and get very good at it too. So yeah.
yeah, yeah. My grandma used to always say, oh, well, you just need to practice. If I'd be like, I can't do this or this looks wrong, she'd be like, well, you just need to practice. And I'd be like, that is not the answer I wanted, but it's true.
Right.
It's true. And what I love too about quilting is that a lot of times when I go to meetings, there's people there who are like, this is my first time here. I just retired and I really want to learn how to quilt. And I'm like, yes, like, that's so cool. Because it's something that you can carry with you for life. Like, I feel like
Hmm.
people play golf and they play tennis for life, but like quilting, that's my tennis or my golf. Like, I'll
Right.
probably be doing that forever. So I'm glad I have that skill. But
Yeah.
I think it's a great way to sort of have um, a connection with other people, but it also with like the craft and the art of quilting. So,
And the past too, because like this is not something that's new, right? It's been around for a long time. And so
hmm
it's just really interesting to me to see how that changes too, and how it was 200 years ago versus today. And so,
I know. And what I think too is how it's so interesting to see how it changes, but also how it's still the same. Like,
right.
it's
Still
so,
fabric, needle, and thread.
yeah, it is. Same thing. And then um, I know both of us have written patterns, released patterns, designed patterns, or had ideas and all these things. And there's so many times when I look at just sort of pattern designing and writing and marketing in general, and I have a little hobby where I just like to look at old quilts, like traditional quilt design, traditional blocks that have been around for hundreds of years, and I'm like, well, that's already been done, but here it is, like reimagined in some way, and um, I personally think that's cool. I think there's sometimes a little too much emphasis on like that's not original, but like there's only so many ways you can kind of arrange these triangles to make a star
Right.
or whatever. So I
Right.
love that.
I think we talked about that a little bit in the past too. Like, it's just, I mean, it is. It's especially with these things that are traditional or like twists on the traditional. I mean, it's not exactly new, but maybe how you get there can be, or how you
Yeah,
arrange different colors or fabrics within that shape can be. And so that's where I find the contemporary part of it fun
hmm
too. So,
yeah, and um that's kind of like the artist part of it, right? Like it's like a lot of people who paint landscapes and like they might be painting the exact same scene outside my window, but it's going to look different stylistically and color wise and scale and all the things. So
hmm.
I personally find that very fascinating, and I love seeing all the variations, but I love seeing the commonality, between all of it.
Hmm.
So do you find well, I found that the way I kind of figured out to do things, even from how my grandmother kind of did them with me, was so different. Like when I did a quilt pattern with her, there were HSTs in it, and the half square triangles were like the odd 7/8 measurement cut on a diagonal, and you just pieced the biased edges
Hmm.
like through your machine. And now I'm like, I feel like if you wrote a pattern like that, people would be like, what is wrong with this woman? Like, it's just,
Right.
I don't know. Things like that are really cool. It's innovation.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
really like older books about quilts and patterns, and like the older quilting patterns themselves, because they
hmm
are very different than a pattern that you'll pick up that was written within, the last couple of decades.
Yeah,
It's
for sure.
so interesting.
It is. And people were cutting like diamonds. I saw a book, one of my books that I really like to just kind of peruse and look through for ideas and things were like there was a special way you could fold a square in all these like almost origami, and then with like a couple cuts you'd have like eight identical like diamond shapes from this
Hmm.
one fabric. So I'm like, even cutting and all this stuff is so different, but it's still the same. So speaking of traditional design and classic quilting, um, you reached out to me with an idea because you were making a baby quilt, right? For a
Hmm.
friend, and you were like, I just started doing this, and I kind of figured out this was an older traditional design. So it's your story, and I want you to tell us about it, but we'll kind of talk about why
Yeah.
we're on this tangent.
Yeah. So, yeah, I was making a baby quilt for somebody that I know a little bit, but not super well. So I didn't exactly know how to like tailor it so that, but I wanted her to like it. So I leaned more towards the traditional route and was flipping through one of the books that I really like for inspiration on traditional things. I already had cute fabric that I wanted, and I knew that I wanted something that would showcase that, but not be boring on the piecing side. So yeah, I was just flipping through and looking for ideas and saw the ladies' wreath quilt block in this book that I have, which is just half square triangles in a couple of different fabrics arranged a couple of different ways to make this fairly simple design. Um, and thought, oh, that's perfect, and figured out what sizes I needed to cut and just kind of started making it. But as I was making the quilt, I was thinking about why on earth is it called ladies' wreath? Like, these half square triangles don't really look like a wreath. I could kind of see how they might look like a wreath when you put a bunch of blocks together, but I don't, yeah, where's this name from? You know? And so as I was thinking about that, I started like Googling it later
Yeah.
just on my phone and, kind of looking up ladies' wreath, quilt block, ladies' wreath history, like trying to get an idea. Um, in this particular book that I have, it's all compilations of quilt blocks that were named by the Ladies Art Company, which, if you delve into quilting history even a little bit, it's probably a name that you've heard because they had this publication that started in the 1800s and was like there were quilt designs and blocks and all kinds of different things that were catered towards what were traditionally, you know, ladies
Yeah.
industries or ladies crafts or whatever. Um, so anyway, yeah, so it was named by the ladies art company, and I found a little bit about that, and it was late 1800s that they gave it this name. And then I stumbled upon a blog from like 2012, 2013 that was started to commemorate the suffragists and the suffragettes and their struggle leading into what would be the ratification of the women's right to vote in the US, right?
Hmm.
And one of the blocks that they featured was the ladies' wreath. And so she has this fascinating write-up about it was so named to invoke the thought of the mourning wreath that was used at women's funerals. And then it got into a commentary about, the mortality rate for women who were childbearing was high. And then there's this double standard that was originally part of some of the suffragists' ideas that they wanted to overturn and give more women's rights to, with it would be dangerous to women's health to become pregnant again or have another child. And legally, around this 1900 time period, uh, she could be told by her physician that it would be dangerous for her to have another child. but it would be illegal for that physician to tell her how to avoid pregnancies, especially in cases where, she's married and it's her husband's right, not hers. And, it's this whole thing. But part of this blog talks about how then this block became a little bit of a subterfuge in protest of that double standard that, oh, well, you might die if you haven't had a kid, but I can't tell you how to not do it. So, good luck, I guess. I just found that really interesting. And I've been trying to find more. It's really hard to find good sources on some of this history that may not be recorded very well because it was, part of a subsect that it wasn't seen as important to record this history. Author of the book that like brought all of these blocks together into this compilation. Like I've sent her a note and I kind of asked, I'm interested in more of this. Like, are there other sources you could point me towards? Because they're not easy to find. And even in that blog that I found, like there's photos and, some historical information, but they don't tell me what their sources were, which really bugs me. And I really
Right.
want to like find
Yeah.
some of that too. And I just haven't had very much luck, partially because I don't have a lot of time to dig into it, but I just don't have the expertise on where to go either. So I'm trying, but I find it so interesting about what is the history of this particular block and why is it called that and why is it around and like, what was it used for? Even if it's just somebody really liked how those shapes came together, or is there some kind of symbolic meaning behind it? And, I would love to speak to somebody that's an expert in this area. So if anybody knows anyone,
Yeah, I
please
know.
reach out.
If you, so I remember when you told me about it, I started looking through, the old Google, because I couldn't really find a lot of it in any of the books that I have, but
Hmm.
I'm like you. I'm not like an academic kind of quilt historian. I know how to do like research and I know how to try to verify sources and things like that, but I think part of the challenge sometimes is, this is passed on through like basically oral tradition because people, you know, women could have their opinions. Could they talk about them? I don't know, but they probably did when they were quilting together because the quilting
Hmm.
bee was like the social thing that women did. Um, you know, it's just one of those things that when like history is recorded based on like whose side you were on, kind of. Not that it's always
Hmm.
like pitting sides against each other, but women's history is very different, I think, in certain aspects than men's history. Like, we remember World War II and we remember World War, all the things. Um, and then from that, I feel like a lot of these other little kind of side quests have developed and we understand like, oh wow, this is what the women were doing, at home or behind the scenes or things like that. So it is hard to find
Right.
that stuff, especially from think about how many people might have like written this in their journal or just written letters to other people, but like the paper's long gone or the journal got thrown away or whatever. So,
Hmm.
yeah, it's
Yeah, and I
fascinating.
think the same, not just with quilting, but other aspects of everyday life are kind of the same way. And then I think about, somebody that was my equivalent 200 years ago. What do we know about her versus what will somebody 200 years from now like know about, right? So I don't know.
Hmm.
Those are the things that my brain will percolate on in quiet moments.
Yeah, while you're stitching, that's when I do
Right.
some of my best thinking when I'm quilting. Uh, do
Right.
you
When I'm not listening to a book about a fantasy world, that's what I'm thinking about.
I know. Do you quilt almost every day? How often do you get to quilt? I'm always curious.
Um, Almost every day. Um,
Hmm.
Probably in a week, it's 5 days out of 7. And it might be
Yeah.
for an hour, not long, you know. Like yesterday, it was a hard day yesterday, and I said, "All right, once we get home, husband, you're in charge. I'm gonna go down and I'm gonna close the door for an hour, and I'll be back up when my timer goes off." But it's just like I needed that reset to, do whatever. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, this is my happy place down here.
Hmm. Yeah. That's how I am. This is like holy ground. This is where I recharge. I'm like, I have quiet, I can process things, I can relax, and then I'm good to go.
Hmm.
But
Yeah,
um, yeah,
I lose track of time if I don't set a
have a
timer for
timer.
myself. Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned sometimes the sew-ins with the Quilt Guild, the Modern Quilt Guild.
Hmm.
Have you ever gone to like a retreat or anything like that?
Yeah, I've been to a couple. And one of the first like retreat I had, it was a couple of friends that I met on socials. They said, "Hey, we live in a similar geographical area. You want to like rent a cabin in the middle of nowhere and just go sew for a weekend?" So that's how I met Abby with Abby Made and Tamara with Remy Vega Studios. It's like we live kind of close to each other. We never met before, and then we just show up at this cabin in the middle of farmland in Wisconsin, and it was great. And then I've
Yeah,
done like a
luckily those gals are on the up and up. They weren't catfishing
right,
you out to a
right.
cabin.
We talked about that too. It's like in any other situation, I would not be okay with this. But who's gonna catfish a quilter?
Yeah.
You know, I don't know. So, but yeah, we kind of half joked. It's like, I've got my location turned on. My husband can track me. So, you know, if I don't show up after the end of the weekend, you know.
He will
But yeah,
know.
no, it was fun. And then I've done a couple of actual organized retreats too, which are also fun. Um, and I'll do more of them as time allows.
Yeah, I know. I've never really had um, an opportunity to do a retreat, and I've always wondered, I'm like, I think I would have the stamina to do it. Like, it's, it's a lot to like sit and quilt. There's a retreat center just outside of our town, and sometimes like our quilt club will rent it for a weekend or whatever, and they're like, "Yep, you go, you just get up at the crack of dawn if you want to, and you can sew till the next morning if you want to." And I'm like, I feel like I would injure myself like trying to get things done. But it sounds so fun and magical, but I've never gotten to do it. But I
Yeah.
used to I used to sew with my grandmother when I was my grandmother lived for a very long time. She lived until she passed away when I was 32, 32. And I feel just so lucky. But when I was in like even college and like I did medical school and then even parts of residency, I would go to her house for like a week. And while we were there, we would work on a quilt or some kind of project, you know? And I
Hmm.
always really loved quilting with her, like group project kind of thing, which I'm
Hmm.
normally not that kind of person at all. But I don't know. Sometimes I feel like that's something I could add into my practice a little bit, but it's hard. But I just get out here and like crank things out by myself usually. So,
Yeah. Yeah, the fun thing about a retreat is like you can see what other people are doing. And then when you get a bunch of people in a room that like similar things, it's fun talking, like while you're working. And then you crack
Yeah.
open the bottle of wine at 10 o'clock in the morning and you sip on it through the day. Yeah,
Yeah.
because
See,
quilting
this
while
is all
drinking is
good.
never a bad idea.
Yeah. The worst, it's like the worst is when you're tired. Like
Hmm.
a little wine, you'd probably be loosey goosey. Like you probably just let go and get more done. But like the tiredness is when I start really like
Oh,
making the silly mistakes that make
that's
me
when the seam ripper
angry.
comes out because I sewed something upside down. That's when I'm tired.
Hmm. Yeah. Or like the other day, I sewed two HSTs like wrong sides together. So I was like, dang it, like what is this? But it was like a funny little like, well, we can't be perfect all the time. So anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, I did that the other night when I was finishing the blocks for a scrappy sample of a pattern that I've got coming up. I realized, oh, there's a couple of those little volumes that I sewed upside down. And so I ripped them out and sewed them right back. And as I was putting the blocks together yesterday, I realized, oh, look, that one's still upside down. It's gonna stay that way. So there's a couple of
Oh,
pieces in there where the low volume is wrong side up, but you know what? You can't really tell.
you'll
It's fine.
never tell. Yeah. Yeah, I love when I fix a problem by sewing it incorrectly a second or third time.
Yeah.
That's one of my specialties, but I want to talk just at least briefly about how did you how did you decide to kind of dive into the sort of pattern design, pattern writing, publishing kind of side of things? Because it is different. It's a different kind of skill set, priority set to kind of transition from I'm just quilting to like chill out and keep my brain on right before I like just lose it. Or this is just like fun in my social circle to like, I'm going to actually offer this to people and, write patterns up to a certain standard and all these things. So, how did you kind of evolve into Due North Handmade?
I think I kind of mentioned earlier that I've just always had ideas kind of floating around, and I never started exactly following patterns, just kind of going along with what I needed to get to what I had percolating up there. Um, but also professionally, I have an engineering degree, and in like the first decade of my professional life, most of what I was doing was writing technical procedures for oil refineries and chemical manufacturing and, going through these things. So definitely used to, there's a specific standard and things have to be specific and clear and done a certain way in order to, one, be effective, but also be safe. Because, you do
Yeah.
something wrong, it could be a really bad day in some of those environments. Um, So it just seems second nature to be like, all right, so I want to make this quilt block. This is exactly how I would do it. Um, and with these ideas floating around, it's just kind of a challenge more to myself than anything else to see if can I make one of these and will people buy it? And how do I actually do that? Like, and so that's where I kind of got into and signed up for one of the online pattern writing classes that are out there. And then another year, I took another one from another designer, and both were great in different ways. And I learned different things from both of them. Um, but yeah, that was kind of the beginning of it. And I also kind of liked when I was thinking I could make baby quilts for friends at cost less than buying them a baby gift. I thought that this would be a really great way to make some easy passive income. Yeah, it's a lot of work. It's not like it's, super passive. So, yeah, that was kind of why I started putting them down on paper and getting them out there. And even now, the first one that I did, I want to completely rewrite because there's a lot of things that I've learned since that I would do differently and actually getting that one down there. So, yeah.
Yeah. It's a process, right? It's like a whole
Hmm.
process. I was reading in one of my little books, like old patchwork quilts and the women who made them. Um, there was like a little this little like one-liner sentence. I was talking about how, like people would hold on to their quilt tops that they pieced, for like their dower chest and all these
Hmm.
things. And then it was like when they like broke them out to actually have them quilted as basically the way to announce their engagement or whatever. Um, the woman in her 70s, how did it put it? It was like, this is when the woman in her 70s has come into her own because apparently she was like so expert at quilting. Like she would just like be the star of the quilting bee. I was like, okay, so it is about the process. It's not about like perfection and knowing how to do things immediately. So I like hearing that pattern writing can be that too, right?
Oh, absolutely. Like each one I do, there's something new that I try or I do a little differently, or like I figured out how to do a little better for myself to kind of get forward to.
Yeah.
So it's always
Yeah.
evolving. I've seen the
Which is
same in
good.
other writers too, from differences from some of their past patterns to some newer ones that it seems like everybody is always sort of tweaking what they do.
Yeah. Do you feel like you do that when you sew, like with your actual quilting? Like, do you try new things or are you like, this is how I do it, this is how I'll get it done fast?
Um, Depends on what it is, but I think I do a little bit of both.
Yeah, I think I
Or
do
somebody will
too.
say, try and do this, and so I'll try it and be like, oh yeah, or not gonna do that again. I like my other way better, you know.
Yeah.
So,
But at least you try, because I I like hand binding, but it takes a while. It takes a long time. And I was trying to finish a quilt one time and I was like, I'm gonna try this machine binding thing, even though I'm just totally against it. I'm gonna try it. Not that I like judge other people for doing it. I just didn't want to try it, but I kind of felt
hmm.
like I had to. And I like hated. I didn't dislike doing it. I just didn't like my execution because it's not like it's the easiest thing in the world. But
Right.
I used like a tiny stitch length and it was like this kind of vintage fabric because I also like to use some older fabrics and I was like, oh my gosh, kind of had like 4 seconds of like, should I just rip this out? Should I just redo it? I was like, no, I am not. This will just be a lesson learned. If I try machine binding, I will try another method next time. But, you know, I
Hmm.
try every so often kind of to stretch my skills a little bit, but yeah.
I'll do that too. Or like I'll be interested in a different technique, and so I'll try something. I want
Yeah.
to be like, I want to try, this English paper piecing thing. Like, what is this? How is this? And I've been slowly chipping away at something for a while, and yeah,
Yeah.
I dabble.
Yeah. Which is fun. Before we start wrapping up, I have some these are kind of the like deep questions, the existential thoughts that I like to have on the podcast. But I'm going to ask broadly. So, when you look back over from your very first grade quilted pillow to all the baby quilts you've made, the patterns you've written, all the things, what does quilting mean to you? Like, what is quilting to you?
To me, there's two big parts of it, and part of it is the actual like creating and the doing of it. And for me, that's very personal, where it's very much a this is my space, this is my reset, this is the thing that is fully mine that I don't have to share with anybody else in my house. This is the me self-care part of it. And then part of it is the I love the finished quilt too. Like I love having a pile of them on my couch at all times. I love that, I can give one to somebody or sell one to somebody and they'll also enjoy this for, who knows how long. So it's there's definitely two parts of it for me. It's a very personal, this is mine and no one else's to the this is everyone else's and everyone can enjoy it, but they're quite distinct kind of in my head. It's very hard to describe, but they're very
No, but I get
compartmentalized, the
it.
two different parts of it.
Yeah, I get it because that kind of leads actually very well into my next um, question and thought that I always want to challenge any of us to have um, is, and it sounds like you have, but how much have you thought or considered about your quilting story and your quilting knowledge and skills is your quilting legacy? That's what I call it. And I think that's what it is. Um, so, how have you ever thought about how that's being passed on or kind of perpetuated, that sort of stuff?
I guess I don't really think of myself as having a legacy per se, but being part of it in general. Like it's a bigger thing that I'm a little piece of. And like, I've been trying to be a lot better about labeling the quilts people. And at least putting like my name and the year or even just the year on it. Because, if I see a older quilt at a thrift store or an estate sale or, wherever, I rescue a lot of them, but most of them don't have any of that information. And since I'm curious about who is the person that made this or why did this get made, when was it made, it'd be kind of nice to know. So I try and at least make that part of what I make that it's at least the when and the who, if not the why, because sometimes there's not a why other than I just really needed to make something that day. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
so
Well, yeah, I'm not perfect about documenting my work either, but um, we're like part of the big story. So I try to put some detail on when I can on a label. But my
mhm.
um, my grandma didn't label a lot of stuff. It was just like we knew that was her quilt and all these things. But I actually found a book where she would take pictures of her quilts that she had finished, like out on a bed or something. They're not like good pictures at all, but she'd like put them in a book and write like who she gave it to and if it was a event or something like that for the
Mhm.
reason. But one thing I would say kind of another piece to being kind of part of um, the story of quilting is having you have patterns out in the world on the internet, you have a blog, a website. Um, so tell us where our listeners can find you, Kate.
Yeah, so I have my website for basically anything digital download, and that's duenorthhandmade.com. No spaces, no hyphens, just duenorthhandmade.com. And then my blog's on there, which I've got plans to add more content to, and a little write-up about the ladies' wreath is on there, and you can get a little free download with some different sizes if you wanted to make some different quilt sizes and suggested fabric requirements for that and how you could put it together. Um, and then for physical patterns, I either wholesale directly or shops can order my patterns through Brewer Sewing. And there's a couple that are coming with Moda later this year. So there's a few places that shops can wholesale them from, either from me directly or from some of those other distributors. So yeah, I can always be reached on through my website. Send me a note and I can get you the information you need. Or um, Instagram is a good place to find me too. So at Due North
Instagram.
Handmade is my handle.
Perfect. Yeah. We'll put links to all of this like down in the show notes so that you don't even have to type anything in. You can just click. I'm really excited to go look at your ladies' wreath information. And if you have a link to your kind of blog um, that you found where you kind of started digging into your
Hmm.
information, I would love to share that too because that sounds very
Absolutely.
interesting and intriguing. So
Yep. I have
we'll
that linked
like,
in my post also. So yep,
okay,
definitely can
good.
get there.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah. We'll, yeah, I think it's fun to do some sleuthing. And so I'm just going to encourage people to go check it out because it's part of the fun to me. So.
Hmm.
Is there anything we didn't talk about? Any burning quilty topics on your mind?
There's always stuff we can talk about.
I know. What are you,
But
can you
no,
tell us what you're working on right now? Like, what are you, if you could go start quilting right now, what would you do?
I am giving a glow up to a pattern that I wrote for Wildflower Quilt Company exclusive last year. And so I'm working to expand that to include more sizes. And so I'm making a couple of samples for that. Um, and then I'm also trying to work through my backlog of whips and UFOs from over the years. So works in progress and unfinished objects. I counted up all those unfinished projects that are piled up in boxes and bags and things in my closet. And there's at least 28 of them. So I'm gonna try and knock some of those out. Yep.
Yeah, that's hard. Priorities. I mean, we only have so much time in the day is the thing.
So it's like I start something and then I find that I'm not enjoying this as much as I thought, or something else comes up and so I set it aside to work on something else and then never get back to it. You know, stuff happens.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing your time with us, Kate. I really
Yeah,
appreciate it. I'm really excited for your kind of dabbling in quilt history, and I want to see where it takes you because I love it. If you ever hear back from the blogger that you sent a note to, I want to
hmm.
hear about it. I want to stay updated because
Oh,
now I'm
absolutely.
curious.
Yeah, the writer of that book, she did send me a note back and said, "Let me think about this for a few days. I'll get back to you." So I haven't heard back yet, but I'm hoping that she's got something.
Yeah, yeah, awesome. Well, it's good to know people are out there. I think that's something too about quilting is that quilters, I feel, are like ready and willing to share information. So just ask, a lot of times it's the best way to find stuff out. So it's good to know.
Right?
It is always good to know where to find more information. Kate, thank you so much for your time being here today. I want to just remind you, listeners, you can head down to the show notes and find more information about Kate, her business, and all of her quilting. You can find her on Instagram at Due North Handmade or on her website at www.duenorthhandmade.com. Again, those will be linked in the show notes. Thank you so much for being here for our conversation. Can't wait to see you guys next time here on the Patchwork Revival Podcast. Well, that's it for this episode of Patchwork Revival. I loved having you here with me talking all things quilting. Don't forget to subscribe to the show and leave a rave review. Also, be sure to jump down to the show notes to find links for this episode, as well as the link to my shop where you can enjoy 15% off as a podcast listener with code REVIVAL. Remember that the Patchwork Revival Podcast is here to celebrate the connection made in the quilts we love. I'll see you next time.